I will reconvene regular council meeting number 1553. And in honor of the Liwa-Tool, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwa Nation. Under the village's council procedure bylaw, councillors, staff, delegations, and the public may attend a council meeting in person or via electronic means. However, due to the increase in COVID-19 transmission and positivity rates, out of an abundance of caution, the village has closed the village's office to the public. As such, pursuant to Section 10 of Council Procedure Bylaw 788, this meeting will be held electronically, and all members of council and staff will be attending via electronic means. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. The recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can somebody move as presented? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. Rise with report from in camera. So they're just gonna have to find that. The rise from report from in camera is that Jagoda Kozikowska be appointed for a 2-year term to the Advisory Land Use Commission to expire in December 2024. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1551 and 1552, moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising? Seeing none. Business arising from committee of the whole. Give me a second. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. So coming out of today's committee of the whole, regarding the Canada Infrastructure Program, the Green Infrastructure Stream Grant regarding a water treatment plant project. The recommendation from the committee of the whole was that council direct staff to prepare and submit an application to the Canada British Columbia Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program in the environmental quality substream for the funding to support the development of a new water treatment plant facility for the village of Pemberton, and that staff prepare a report seeking the formal authorization by way of resolution required by the village for this project for consideration by council at the February 1st, 2022 meeting. Can I have somebody make that motion, please? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. And the second item from committee of the whole is regarding the Redwoods OCP and rezoning application. And the recommendation from committee of the whole is that council that official community plan and zoning bylaw amendment proposed lands located at 7374 East Pemberton Farm Road, legally described as Lot 5DL 211, not proceed in its current form, and that staff be directed to request a substantial amendment to the proposed application to align it more closely with the guidance in the official community plan, existing and proposed development in the area, and the hillside development guidelines. And further, that the revised proposal be returned to a further committee of the whole meeting for review and direction. Would somebody like to make that motion? Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Committee minutes, we have none. Delegations, none. So we're on to number 12, staff reports. We're at the Office of the CAO verbal report. Ms. Gilmore.
I do not have a verbal report this evening. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, then we're on to 12A2. We're going to promote Ms. Tays to the panel. Oh, there she is. Good evening, Ms. Tays. We're on item number 12A2, the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Emergency Support Services Funding Stream.
Great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having me here this evening. So the purpose of this report is to seek council support to apply to UBCM's Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Emergency Support Services funding stream to implement the ESS modernization project. So ESS provides short-term basic support to people impacted by disasters, and the program is financed through Emergency Management BC and administered by local governments. EMBC launched the ESS modernization project in 2019, which aims at digitizing and modernizing ESS delivery, including the launch of the new online evacuee registration and assistance tool. Currently, the village's ESS program is delivered through in-person registration and referrals using paper forms. And this has actually made the process quite challenging, especially through the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result of the village onboarding with the ESS modernization project, ESS response capacity will be increased with the option for in-person virtual registration with the option for in-person or virtual registration to safely navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic. The digital platform will also allow ESS accommodation and referral suppliers to receive reimbursement more efficiently. Additionally, the modernization project will allow the village's ESS program to become consistent with neighboring jurisdictions and provide redundancies to current processes already in place. This funding stream will enable the village to purchase the necessary technology, including tablets, cell phones, charging stations, and a Wi-Fi smart hub. Funding for this project is made available through UBCM's CEPF under the Emergency Support Services funding stream, and the fund can contribute to a maximum of 100% of the cost of eligible activities to a maximum of $25,000. So the recommendation is that council supports an application to UBCM's CEPF ESS funding stream for funding in an amount up to $25,000 to implement the ESS modernization project within the village of Pemberton.
Thank you, Ms. Tays. Any questions? Sounds pretty straightforward. Would somebody like to move the recommendation in support of the application? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Carry on, Ms. Tays.
So the purpose of the second report is to also seek council support to apply to UBCM's Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Operations Center and Training Funding Stream for the purchase of additional Emergency Operations Center equipment. In 2021, the village activated the EOC several times in response to multiple different emergency events. And following each activation, a debrief was conducted to assess and refine processes to increase response capacity for future emergencies. A tabletop exercise was also completed in 2021 that allowed essential EOC staff to participate in testing and validation of emergency plans and EOC operations. Through these debriefs and after action reviews, multiple improvements and the need for additional EOC equipment were identified. Some of these include improved communications equipment, such as portable radios and iPads for site level activities, including monitoring and conducting assessments, purchasing additional backup power supplies for operations within the EOC. And the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has also identified the need for specific IT equipment to support a virtual EOC when needed. So in specific, a webcam and microphones to allow for in-person and virtual participation to facilitate a hybrid EOC. And this can also be utilized when stakeholders are unable to attend the physical EOC for reasons other than those related to the pandemic. In addition, funds can be used to create additional redundancy for the EOC by having the ability to mobilize in alternate locations through the purchase of rollable and secure storage for the EOC equipment. So funding for this project is made available through UBCM's Community Emergency Preparedness Fund under the Emergency Operations Center and Training funding stream, and the fund can contribute to a maximum of 100% of the cost of eligible activities to a maximum of $25,000. So the recommendation is that council supports an application to UBCM's CEPF Emergency Operations Center and Training funding stream for funding up to an amount of $25,000 to purchase additional emergency operations center equipment.
Awesome. Thanks again. Any questions? Seeing no questions, would somebody like to make a motion to support the application? Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Awesome. Thank you for that, Ms. Tays. Have a great evening. So we're on to 12B, which is development services. We have some staff joining us again. There we go. Good evening, Mr. McRae, Mr. Chalmers. Thank you for joining us again this evening. Now we're on 12B, development permit number 91, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, council. I'm just going to pull up a brief presentation here. And with the mayor's indulgence, I think there's two development permits on tonight's agenda, DP 91 and DP 92. I will go through the background for both of them and the similarities, and then I will split them off and we'll deal with them each individually, if that's okay with you, Mr. Mayor. So before you tonight, two development permits, development permit number 91, which is for Sunstone Phase 2B, and development permit number 92, which is for Sunstone Phase 2C. And the purpose of these reports and the presentation is for council to consider authorizing our issuance to authorization to issue both of these development permits. The permits are effectively to regulate the grading and retaining structures on each of these phases, and they've been submitted in response to subdivision applications. I'll get into the background in a little bit about why we're approaching it this way. The reason that these applications are before council is that they include two proposed variances for both of them. And the proposed variance is to vary the maximum retaining wall height provisions in the zoning bylaw from 1.2 to 2.4 meters. In terms of background, as I mentioned, both of these have been submitted in response to tentative approval letters issued by the approving officer for subdivision of land. Over the last several years, council has identified issues with hillside development. We've issued the hillside development guidelines. There's been some instances of structures being built inconsistent with the bylaw and so on. And approximately a year ago or so, we brought forward a zoning amendment, and council suggested that they'd prefer to deal with any requests for retaining wall height variances and other things on a case-by-case basis. So that's why we're here in front of you tonight. Over the last number of months, several of these development permits have been issued as minor development permits as a delegated authority of the manager of development services. And they've all been trying to do the same thing, which is to create comprehensive site grading in advance of subdivision approval, so that we know where each building envelope and elevation will be. We know what retention is required. The ones we've issued to date have not required nor requested variances to the zoning bylaw. But the overall approach is to make sure that we're capturing the development of the site in terms of its impact on the hillside and comprehensively planning rather than abdicating the final elevations for building and grading to the ultimate purchasers and builders. As I mentioned, both of these propose a variance from 1.2 to 2.4 meters in retaining wall height. Council may recall there was a committee of the whole report that was presented a couple of months ago that discussed the two options to retention on this site. And both of these sites have a very similar condition and are making an identical variance request for under both permits. And the top option shown on this graphic is what the walls would look like should the applicant follow the provisions of the zoning bylaw. So it would be multiple tiers of retaining walls in fairly close proximity to each other. 0.6 meters is the minimum setback between each wall. So the top graphic shows that, indicates that. The lower graphic shows the result of the variance should it be successful, which is slightly higher walls stepped further apart. So they'd be 2.4 meters rather than 1.2. They'd be further separated to permit additional plantings in between. The applicants at that time provided a rationale that in effect, it creates the same amount of wall in a vertical plane. So if one were standing at the bottom and looking at it, it creates the same height of wall. It retains the same height overall, but the larger retaining walls provide a greater opportunity for landscaping in between. As a result of that discussion, oops, I forgot to put in a date, my apologies. But as a result of that discussion, Committee of the Whole did pass a resolution that was ultimately endorsed by council. That resolution was that staff be directed to continue processing that application for phase 2B, which was DP 91 with the variance. At that meeting, development permit 92 had kind of just come through the door. It was referenced by staff in the presentation. Council elected not to amend the resolution to include it, but as it's not customary to take these sorts of matters to Committee of the Whole anyways, between the applicant and staff, we decided we'd bring them both. Those are very similar considerations. The two sites that we're talking about here, phase 2B is the bottom one, phase 2C is the top one. 2B is a 7-lot subdivision, 2C is an 18-lot subdivision. They are on the hillside. They do have topographic constraints, which we're trying to address through these applications. So now I'll split, that was kind of the general discussion. I'll split them apart. Development permit number 91 for phase 2B, which is the 7-lot subdivision. This is an example of some of the schedules which are attached to the permit in your agenda. It identifies in detail the grading that's required. The permit identifies in detail the grading that's required on each lot. So it establishes the building envelopes and the spot elevations for those envelopes so that all of the lots work together. It identifies, as you can see on this graphic, the retaining wall requirements, and then it gets into specific details about each lot and how it will be graded and what the retaining will be. The importance of that is that whether the developer chooses to do all of the grading or some of the grading or some or all of the retention or some of the retention, it will be comprehensively planned and contiguous. It will be binding on the first stage developer who grades the land, and it will remain binding on the purchasers that over the long term, they can't make decisions on their property without amendment to the permit that would alter the grading or the retention structures. So this DP 91 does include the variance we've been talking about up to 2.4 meters. This is another example of what the detailed engineering drawings look like over the site. These are all attached as schedules to the development permits. The other consideration in a development permit is that it does allow for us to secure the landscaping. In this instance, the landscaping is outlined. The landscaping requirement follows the retaining structures. There's some detailed cost estimates and numbers of trees and so on as attached as a schedule. But for DP 91, the landscaping bonding would be $28,770. Staff have prepared 3 options for council to consider. Option 1 is approval as presented. So that would be the issuance of the development permit with the variance. Option 2 would be approval of the development permit without the variance. So as you're aware, there were 2 options for retaining: multiple walls versus less walls. Option 2 would achieve that, and the effect of it would be that staff would amend take the variance out of the DP, and we would continue on. In both instances, we'd anticipate a change in the landscape security because the smaller walls would have different types of landscaping, but we can certainly still authorize issuance tonight. And then option 3 would be to refer it back to staff. So before we advance, because there are 2 separate items on the agenda, Mr. Mayor, before we advance to DP 92, perhaps we'll stop here and see if there's any questions specific to DP 91.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. Take your screen down, that'd be great. Thank you. Any questions from council? Councilor Craddock, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Through to Mr. Chalmers. Maybe your memory is better than myself, but are we getting close to that 6-month time frame where council turned down the bylaw change from 1.2 to 2.4?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that was a bylaw amendment that was brought forward by staff. So we brought that forward. That was not in response to a specific development application. That was brought forward as a municipal amendment to the zoning bylaw in acknowledgement that the 1.2 meters was problematic on hillside developments. So they're really, to that extent, it didn't come under the development procedures bylaw, so there's no limitation on the timing.
Okay, there isn't, because seeing this is the third one that's been brought forward in the last 6 weeks for variance. I'm wondering if it's time for us to revisit that, because until it becomes a bylaw, I'm still going to have to vote against both of these, but it sounds to me like it's going to be the way we have to go. And with the new other development on the bench lands coming into place, I guess it'd be best to have that in order.
Okay, well, if council's appetite is to bring back the zoning around that, we could entertain a motion to that effect after, for sure.
Thank you.
Any questions? Pardon me, any questions on the Mr. Chalmers report? Go ahead, Councillor Noble.
No questions, but I'd like to move option 1. I like the landscaping factors with that. Makes sense to me.
Okay, I got a couple quick questions, mostly the one. So the landscaping bond, the letter of credit, obviously that ensures that the landscaping gets installed. Do we have any tools to make sure landscaping gets maintained? The screening is a big portion. It seems to me that, what council's been trying to accomplish all the way and staff is trying to accommodate is for us to be able to move ahead with hillside development that fits most naturally into the landscape and where retention isn't in your face and obvious and a visual scar. So that's been the main focus. What I'm reading in the report, similar to I think where Councillor Noble was going, is that by spacing the retention walls this way, it'll allow for much better landscaping and therefore much better screening. So my question is, do we have tools to ensure that moving forward over the years that landscaping gets maintained, that screening gets kept?
Mr. Mayor, through you, this landscaping will follow the standard process for landscaping. There will be a reduction in the bond amount after installation. So once it's installed per the requirements, there will be a 1-year maintenance period. The rationale for that is that once 1 year follows, it will become, it will be set. The landscape will be succeeding. Now, in this case, normally when we deal with this, we're dealing with things like strata complexes or industrial uses. In this instance, we're dealing with individual lot owners. The owners will bear the ultimate maintenance requirement of the permit. Offhand and without pulling it up, I can't recall exactly the language that's used in the permit. If council wanted to amend the permit to effectively, I think the permit is strong enough that if someone didn't maintain it, council would have the ability to pursue that with the individual future owner. But at this stage, it's following the standard landscape obligations. So.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure if this is a direction that we go in, that we use strong enough language to make sure that the landscaping is maintained, because that's a huge component to what we're trying to accomplish here in my eyes. And from a staff's perspective, I'll ask the same question of council. From a staff's perspective, do you see this as going in the direction of accomplishing that goal of blending into the landscape as best as possible? Or are there other options that we could be exploring here?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I do believe so. I mean, the reality of the retention often is that a certain amount of land will need to be retained. And when viewed in perspective, so when viewed from below, multiple walls versus single walls, larger walls versus smaller walls probably don't have that significant a visual difference. What we do believe and what we do assert is that the additional landscaping that's achievable will soften the visual appearance of the retaining walls. I think this is, again, an area that as we move through and continue to mature our hillside development, we'll continue to look at. But we also understand that these walls will be made of more natural-like materials. It will be, they will blend into the landscape. The reality of the natural topography in this area is that we do have rock outcroppings, we do have rock walls. There's often interspersed vegetation, and the closer we can mimic that, the better. I will make one other comment, which is only fair. But we do understand that there's been another rethink of some of one or both of these development permits, and they may not need to exercise the variance to the extent that they've requested. So, you know, out of cost and other further geotechnical issues, the walls may not be as big. Because DVPs are permissive, that's okay. We can issue the permits, but, you know, I think we'll continue to work with the applicants to try and create variations in height, more natural looking characteristics to the walls. But I do believe as we move forward with development permit areas specific to hillside development, those are exactly the sort of things that council will want to incorporate.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll go back to you, Councillor Noble. I think you wanted to make a motion.
Yes, I'd like to move, I believe that was option 1.
Before we go there, may I make a note? There is nothing about ongoing maintenance in the DP. I'm not sure if there's something we want to put in there.
No.
It just talks about the 1-year maintenance.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. Do we have an amendment to that, or how would you suggest, if we're going to go ahead with this, how would you suggest we strengthen that ongoing maintenance bit?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that we add a new section J5 in development permit number 91.
Okay,
That states owners shall maintain the landscaping in a healthy and fit condition within their individual properties boundaries, or something to that effect.
okay. So maybe we'll do that as a separate motion then.
Mr. Mayor, it'd be appropriate to
Incorporate.
amend the permit and then approve the permit as amended.
So include this in the motion to amend the permit. Okay,
Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion to amend the permit as presented, then approve as amended. So 2 separate motions. So it would be appropriate to take a motion to amend the permit to add section J5.
okay. So would somebody like to start by making that motion? Councillor Noble, seconder. I'll second it. So again, to be clear, this is to include the section that landscaping gets maintained by the property in a health and fit condition by the property owners within their individual properties. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Noble, then Councillor Antonelli.
Just as a landscaper, I do believe that the extra space and depth will be helpful for both water and root retention to ultimately have more successful long-term landscaping.
Thank you. Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, when this came to us before, we talked about retaining to help with the development. And I guess my understanding was that that was to create a footprint for the buildings. But in all of the diagrams I'm seeing, the retaining is to build out the rear yard. And I'm just not certain that that's where we were going with this when we started down this road of saying, yeah, these lots are appropriate for retaining. I think it's a really good idea for the developer to have a comprehensive plan. That's essential. But, you know, I'm just sort of looking down the road. Is this where we want to go now, where we're supporting 5 meters of retaining to build out the rear yard?
Okay. Is there any, would staff like to add anything to that? Any clarity to that?
Mr. Mayor, through you, it may be the drawings that were presented in the presentation, because the only change from the committee of the whole was one small administrative error on the labeling of the drawings. They haven't changed since. These are the same drawings that were presented to committee of the whole.
Okay. Anyone else? So calling the question on the motion to include a section on the maintenance moving from, after the 1 year of landscaping. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then Councillor Noble, you'd like to table the motion to, just read it here. Council authorized development permit 91 with variances for issuance to Sunstone Ridge Developments for Sunstone Phase 2B with the provision of cash, irrevocable letter of credit or other acceptable security in the amount of 28,770 to secure landscaping. And that development permit 91 included variance to section 721 of the Village Permanent Zoning Bylaw to increase the maximum retaining wall height from 1.24 to 2.4 meters. Moved by Councillor Noble. Seconder. Seconded for discussion. Further discussion. Again, my thoughts are that this is going the direction of the goals set out by council, which are to screen retention as best as possible and to fit the landscape as best as possible. So I'll personally be supporting the motion. Anyone else? Seeing none, call the question. Any opposed? Councillor Craddock. Councillor Zant. Councillor Antonelli, did I see your hand? Councillor Antonelli, so motion dies. Okay,
Can I just confirm that everybody would like their opposition noted for the minutes?
so. Sorry, I don't have the other options in front of me. I got to pull them back up. Mr. Chalmers, can you read about the other options that were presented, or would council like to?
Mr. Mayor, I believe under your development procedures bylaw, the application has been refused.
Okay, so that's the end of that.
So there, just to correct, there's no retention on this. There will be no retention on this development.
Well, we may need to explore some alternatives here because I don't believe it's a suitable or available option to refuse the application as a development permit. It meets the guidelines. Council ought to approve it. But I do believe that any development approval that's brought forward and is refused by council is a refusal. There may be ways for a reconsideration at a later date, but I'm not certain we can jump to another. We had this issue before with the development variance permit.
By denying the variance, they still have the ability to go ahead with retention.
It also included approving the DP.
It was one motion for approval with variance.
Councilor Antonelli, did I see your hand? Go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, most of it I do agree with. It's just like I said, there are a few areas where the walls are really high and it is to hold up the backyard. And our guidelines do talk about terraced yards and not doing too much cut and fill and that kind of thing. So I personally would just like to see the taller end of the walls just thought out a little bit more with a little bit more language to reflect this whole long journey we've been on. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, but I do think this one and 92, I see a lot of retaining for backyards, and I'm kind of concerned that this is setting us on a trajectory. Not that I want to toss it all out. I am very pleased that the developer is coming forward with this, concept to do it all in one plan.
Okay. So with what's happened, go ahead, Councilor Craddock, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to ask through Mr. Chalmers or through the mayor, if we split these off and take the second development permit variance out, can we still approve the development permit? Because I think we're in favor of the development permit, but we're not in favor of the variance for the retaining wall. So can they be split in two?
I think I would have to defer to Ms. Fraser because I understood that a motion was tabled first. It was seconded and then it was refused. So I'm just taking a moment to see if there's a way that we could unbundle that. Just give me one moment.
That is correct. I'm
And this
not-
would be, because this is development permit, it would be different than something in our procedure bylaw, a resolution in our procedure bylaw that would allow the mayor to bring it
We'd
back.
have to look
So-
at the development procedures bylaw and then cross-reference it with the council procedures bylaw.
Does
And
that,
I would want to take some time to do that.
and
that-
is this necessarily outlined in our development procedures, or is this actually a higher piece of legislation that dictates that?
I would want to look into that. I can't provide that direction off the top of my head.
Okay, because what I'm hearing from Councillor Craddock and perhaps others is that the voting in opposition was against the variance. And perhaps I should have separated that out at the outset instead of tying them together. But that was the intent, I believe. And those that voted against, please speak up. Either
We've
way.
lost you, Mayor.
We're losing you, Mayor Richmond. I think we've lost him.
But I believe that was the intent in voting in opposition.
We
Yes, sir.
lost you for that whole section, Mayor Richmond.
Oh, can you see me now? Am I back?
You're back, you're live.
Okay, hold on. I'll say it really quickly. I don't want to speak for those that voted in opposition, but I probably should have split those out myself when going into the voting. I believe the intent, as Councillor Craddock said, was to vote against the variance rather than the whole development permit. So if there's a way to unwind that slightly, then I think there would be interest from council to hear that. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if you have to take that away. Come back to us to see what that means, but again, those that voted in opposition, tell me if I'm representing properly, that it was against the variance and not the development permit.
That was my intent.
So I don't know if there's a way to unwind that, Ms. Fraser, or if you need time to take that away.
I wouldn't be prepared to make a recommendation without having an opportunity to look at it and look at the legislation as well as our procedure bylaws. I wouldn't feel comfortable in trying to provide council guidance without being able to look into options.
Okay. Well, we will leave that with staff. Again, I apologize. I probably should have looked at separating that out. I allowed that to go as a bundle. But that takes us to development permit number 92. Anything to add on that before we look for a vote, Mr. Chalmers?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll just go back to my presentation very briefly. So development permit number 92, this is for phase 2C. It's substantively the same application, though this one is for 18 residential lots. The variance request is for up to 2.4 meters of retaining. As you can see, the retention needs are broken out throughout the site. There are significant pockets of lesser retaining. So in no instance are we looking at significant runs of large retaining walls. They are broken out in different forms. Landscape security for phase 2 with the variance would be 44,544. We do not have a cost estimate for the smaller plantings that would typify a smaller wall retaining system. Again, very similar 3 options. Option 1 is approval with the variance. So if council wants to pursue a variance on this one, that would be option 1. Option 2 would be approval without the variance. And option 3 would be that you refer back to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. So again, if I'm hearing comments right, interpreting comments right, So I believe from Councillor Antonelli's perspective, there's consideration, I just want to make sure we get this motion right. There's consideration for changes to the variance request so that there's less focus on yards and more about house and lowering some of the higher walls. And I'm hearing from other councillors that a straight no to any variance by the sounds of it. So I'm looking for a motion either to for option 2, as presented by Mr. Chalmers, or option 3, asking staff to go back to the applicants to refine the variance and address some of the concerns. Did I lay that out better? I just want to make sure I'm not making any mistakes on it. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
I'll move option 2, which removes the variance.
Okay, would somebody like to second that? Councillor Zant, further discussion? My discussion on my comments on it would be, once again, I feel like by varying what we have currently with our requirements will actually bring us closer to achieving our goal of blending into that landscape and covering up the retaining walls as best as possible with screening and landscaping. I feel like that is the right direction. I am more supportive at this point of option 3, to send staff back to see if there can be some tweaking done to the variance to address some of the concerns, including those pointed out by Councillor Antonelli. So I won't be supporting this motion. I would prefer to see option 3 moved on. Because again, I really want to see us attain that goal of blending well into the landscape. Any other comments?
I agree.
Councillor Antonelli, go ahead.
I agree. I think it could just go back to staff for a little touch up to address our comments.
CEO Gilmore, go ahead.
I just want to be cautious that if this motion on the table does not pass, we've then done the same thing we did to the first one,
Right.
because we will then be refusing the DP.
No, if the first one,
Was to approve the DP without a variance.
the second, the motion Councillor Craddock presented in this case, to be safe, it was just that the variance not be approved, correct?
No,
Oh, for God's sake.
Yes, it was.
but wasn't it to approve the DP without the variance?
Approve the DP without the variance, correct?
Correct. It's not just to not have a variance, so it's to approve the DP. So if this fails, then again, we've done the same thing we did the first time.
So Councillor Craddock, is there staff and then therefore Councillor Craddock, is there ability to amend his motion so that the variance as presented is not approved, but the DP is not killed and staff can go back as in option 3? His motion has been made. Is there a way to amend that motion?
I can just withdraw the motion.
Can we do that if it's been seconded?
As long as the seconder approves it.
You guys are testing me tonight. I don't have this stuff on the top of my head.
I got you. Councillor Antonelli, did you have something to help?
Yeah, is it not just, if these DPs don't go forward, is it not just possible to bring back an amended version and we vote on that? Is that?
We could, but right now we already have a motion on the table that's been seconded.
But I don't see why with the mover and the seconder
Yeah.
able to allowing an amendment to why that couldn't just carry on like that. If the seconder agrees, then the motion should be allowed to amend.
If you're wanting to amend the motion that's on the table, if the two movers agree to that, like the friendly amendment.
So the amendment to the motion would be that the variance as presented not be accepted. Is that fair, Councillor Craddock? Is that represent your amendment? And sorry, who seconded? I think it was Councillor Zant. You approve of that amendment? You're nodding there, yeah. Okay, So I will call the question on the motion as amended, which is to not approve the variance as presented. Call the question, any opposed? Motion carries. Would somebody like to make a motion for option number 3?
I will.
Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Antonelli. Further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. And again, I think this was more the intention as we went through the process for development permit number 91. Apologize to staff, but if there's a way we can sort of get to that same place, I think that's where council would like to go. Is there anything more on this from staff or council now that we did that so cleanly? All good. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chalmers. Thank you, Mr. McCray. Great evening. We're on to 13A, bylaws for adoption. Village of Pemberton Agricultural Enhancement Advisory Commission bylaw number 815. Housekeeping 919-2021. The recommendation is that the Village of Pemberton Agricultural Enhancement Advisory Commission bylaw 815 amendment bylaw 919 be adopted. There's no staff presentation on this. Are there any questions, or would somebody like to make that motion? Moved by Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Zant. Any discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. And last on that is the Village of Pemberton Latecomers Interest Rate Bylaw number 920, 2021. And the recommendation is that it be adopted. There's no report on this. Are there any questions? Councilor Craddock, are you moving or?
Correct.
Moved by Councilor Craddock, seconded. Councilor Zant, any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Mayor's report. Before I get into a couple quick updates, I would like to acknowledge our hardworking public works crew. I think we saw record snowfalls before, leading into, and after the Christmas break. And with our small crew, they worked their butts off to keep things clear and keep residents safe and moving around. It's been a mountain of work. They still have a lot of cleaning to do to get some of the side streets clear. I know some folks might be finding it long in some areas, but staff is doing their best. They had to really turn their focus to and attention to drainage. And making sure as the temperatures warmed up and the rain came in that drains were clear and storm water was managed. And now they're back on clearing a lot, but it's been a huge amount of work, and they've worked really hard. So I just want to pass on my appreciation, acknowledgement to all the public works crew for that. And it's ongoing. There's still a lot of snow to move. I have had quite a number of meetings. I'll just try to stick to a few highlights, I guess. First of all, middle of December, I'll go that far back. I was part of a meeting regarding the Pemberton Food Hub project. If you recall, I've had a couple individual meetings on this. And this meeting was brought together by the consultant from Sea to Sky Community Services. And there were participants from Leeward, Sea to Sky Community Services, District of Squamish, Pemberton. There were 23 participants in all. So really well attended, and a really, really strong, great conversation around what we can do as a community and as communities to work together collaboratively to build food security in our area and in the valley. We're very, blessed with agricultural riches here. There are a number of folks that don't have the food security that they deserve, and this work is ongoing. It's how we can develop that food hub here in Pemberton, how we can overcome some of the barriers to food security, fill that need, and how we can work as a collective to make it happen. So as part of that, the next steps or the agreement was to move ahead. We need to operate as a collective. We want to build something that doesn't become a committee that put together a couple good reports and disappeared. that builds a Pemberton food hub, that there's actual concrete action in the hub that comes out. And as part of that, one of the next steps would be to build, I think we called it a collaborative agreement or a charter even, in terms of how we work together as community partners, community to community, to build this food hub and build our food security in the area. You know, obviously out of that came the conversation about collective funding and how we approach this project. And if there is the ability for revenue generation through this project as well, by storing, processing, and distributing food that comes from the Pemberton Valley instead of sending it down the highway in trucks. So a lot of really good conversation, a lot of really passionate involvement in that conversation. So I look forward to seeing where that goes. Like I say, one of the next steps is to look at building a collaborative agreement and then figuring out how we can move ahead and what it looks like and how to fund it. Had an SLRD meeting at the end of December. A couple quick highlights from that. It was a long couple days, but a couple notes of interest. The PILT policy, the payment in lieu of taxes through BC Hydro, that was revised and that revision was adopted a number of years ago. I said like 6 years ago. The PILT policy was amended back then to more accurately ensure that areas were being compensated that were most greatly impacted by hydro activities. This revision was more about giving area directors a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they use those funds, and that was adopted. The Eagle Mountain wood fiber Fortis pipeline, if you recall a number of months ago, I reported that the EAC amendment application was in, and the EAO, the Environmental Assessment Office, approved the amendment and the extension. There was a lot of discussion around how much concern there is in the community about this project in the face of climate change and some of the other concerns about how it's going to go forward. But yeah, ultimately the EAO approved that amendment. There was discussion around the lateral expansion of the landfill in the Squamish Valley. It's estimated that in 2028, they will run out of capacity in that landfill. And so want to start addressing that now in a lateral expansion move. This will have to amend to do so, we'll have to amend the solid waste management plan to accommodate that expansion. And so a motion to that effect was tabled and passed. One of the biggest items on the day was another presentation on the Tiger Bay developments. This is the Britannia South developments. If you recall, it's about 1,050 units, 190 hotel accommodation units, a surf and water park as a commercial hub and employment center within and an attraction within the community. There were some of the concerns that have been brought forward and that the board has brought forward and that I've reported on were brought up again in its current form. And so just to be very high level about it, you know, things like the hazard assessment, a completed hazard assessment, the board would like to see that before second reading is even considered. A number of items that we brought forward, like the affordable housing units that are being provided, how many of those, and the when they get built, things like no natural gas being allowed in the construction into the units, questions around the skate park and pump track, whether they are private and owned by the surf park and public, or is it a public amenity? Again, the phasing of affordable housing, whether the child care space provision is enough and whether it should be added, more should be added to that. More discussion around fire services, Manatee Bay access, more information on the transit hub, more information on EV charger requirements in terms of how many in homes and public. So there was a number of those items that were still brought up, and they will be identified in the term sheet and a development agreement for second reading before the process goes any further. Britannia North, the Heritage Revitalization Agreement came back. If you recall, it came to the board a while ago, and the board wanted to see more inclusion of Indigenous history representation within the development. So the developers responded, and there has been a significant increase and not a significant increase, they are doing a significant representation of Indigenous history, and there is a strong commitment to making sure that that is identified on the site. In the community of the whole, one item of interest, we had a delegation from the ALC talking about some of the changes to the ALR Act. The main one, and that could affect some of the residents in our valley, is that the act will now allow for an additional residence on certain properties. So on properties up to 40 hectares, a second residence will be allowed to a total of 90 square meters. The main residence will also be allowed a suite, but no suite in the second residence. And if the property is over 40 hectares, a second residence of 186 square meters will be allowed. And that's not just for family or farm workers, that's just for anybody. And that applies unless the original home on the property is over 500 square meters, which is a monster home. So the limit is 2 residences total with those criteria around it. Local government can further restrict it. At this point, the zoning and the agricultural zoning does not allow for it in the regional district. So the board has asked to consider whether these new changes and flexibility should be reflected at the SLRD level, whether it changes the home plate approach and that sort of thing. So that'll be coming back to a future committee of the whole. A little closer. Attended the Sea to Sky Hospital Regional District Board meeting. Very quickly, Jen Ford was re-elected as the chair. Mayor Elliott was elected as the vice chair. We had a delegation from VCH, as we do every year. It was a fairly comprehensive high-level description of capital planning projects for VCH, all the way down through assets through the VCH area. Some specific, more specific to the Sea to Sky corridor, but this was an overview, and their plan is to come back in the new year with more specific requests to the board for funding on some of the projects around the Squamish Hospital, and otherwise things around domestic water replacement, cooling units. But those asks specifically will be coming forward later in the new year. However, a lot of the discussion that came out from the board in direction to VCH was the fact that over the years, as I reported before, every year we get a delegation. We're told what the capital projects are, and we're asked to help support funding of some of these projects. And every year there's a request to try to, or there's a desire by the board to try to balance those asks with what we hear from the healthcare community in the corridor in terms of their needs. And as part of that, one of the main things was to get a master plan completed. And the VCH committed to this process a number of months ago. For certain, COVID has slowed down that process. But there was considerable frustration at the board level for not having this master plan in place, and once again getting asked to fund a bunch of capital projects without being able to balance that against, a long picture vision. So at this point, the board is holding back any funding except for related to the CT scanner, which was already committed, until that master plan process is underway. And this, in a couple of weeks here, or next week at our meeting, Sean Parr from VCH will be coming to our meeting. We're going to be discussing this master plan and how we can get it done and move forward so that taxpayers' money at the board gets funded or gets spent appropriately. I think lastly, very quickly, I attended a minister's meeting with Mr. Osborne and Minister Rankin from the Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation Ministry, and Lower Mainland mayors up to Lillooet. Really good discussion, some good, I won't go into it all now, but there's just really good discussion about different projects and initiatives that different communities have taken and what support the ministry can offer on that. So that was very interesting. And attended a couple PVIS meetings, saw a lot of the PDIF funding requests, and I will turn that over to Councillor Zantleiter to report on. And so I think that's it for me. Any councillors' reports? Councillor Craddock, go ahead.
Thanks very much. And I had tourism Pemberton meeting December 15th and January 12th. So I'm going to combine the two together to speed things up a little bit. First of all, their bank balance is in really good shape. They have 39 members, 4 of which are complimentary. I asked the question, what percentage does that represent of people in the business of tourism? And apparently it represents about 85% of the local community. So it seems like a low number, but it represents a large amount of people in the community. They received a letter back from the Village of Pemberton regarding the Waterfall Trail bridge, and they're going to move forward according to the letter they received. They also mentioned that they have in hand engineered drawings for the bridge that are a number of years old, but they have that available. They applied for Canada Community Revitalization Fund for between 240 and 260,000. And mostly that's for washrooms in 10 Keel and Mount Currie area and some cleanup on the Forest Service roads. So that'll be nice to have that done. The AGM is slated for February the 23rd at 7 o'clock. They're looking at a new destination marketing organization for the 3% municipal regional district hotel tax, which would include area A and B and Lillooet. Presently, those 3 people are tied in with Kamloops, and they don't feel they're getting the representation or the marketing that they want out of them. So they're having a look at that. At the second meeting, there wasn't as much enthusiasm, it appeared, for that as what there was in the first place. There was also some real good feedback that they wanted to thank PVIS for their 5-year, 20,000 a year commitment. They were quite pleased about that, and that somewhat surprised me because I know they've always been looking for more money, but that long-term funding seemed to really put them on a positive attitude for that. So that was good. Tourism Pemberton is looking towards a new logo and a name Data Drop. I understand the logo, but I'm not too sure about the name Data Drop. But they're working on those two, and they're putting it out for requests for proposal to do that. For the AGM, they're really trying to promote getting those 39 people out. So they're offering a helicopter ride by Blackcomb Aviation, 1-day 2-person horseback ride by Dawn, and $50 gift certificate. So it might be worth the $250 to join to win one of those prizes. So they're quite happy the way things are going along. The turnout for the second meeting was really good. The other meeting I attended on attended by Zoom on December 16th was Pemberton Valley Diking District. Under the emergency, they did some removal of the culvert on the North Arm Farm to get better flow. There's public survey presentation on January 12th at 7 o'clock. They had 371 responses from that, so they're pretty pleased about that kind of feeling about it. They're working on a 2022 budget and a 10-year plan for the Diking District. The long-term planning is underway, and hopefully they'll have that done in the next couple of months. With the high stream flows, what Kevin brought to us was the Arn Canal was above the 50-year flow rate that it was designed to handle. The Pemberton Creek was equivalent to a 15-year flow. The Green River 30 to 40 year. And they were pleased that the new Arn Canal outlet culverts that were installed worked 100% and there was no flood issues in that area. One thing that was brought up is where the new recreation site is. He found that was overburdened with the water that's coming off of Sunstone, Ritchie Ditch and McRae Road Ditch and North Arm Channel. Right now, it's lacking the capacity to handle the water, so they're looking at doubling the culverts that go under the highway there to better move that water. I think that pretty much wraps up the meetings. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other council reports? Councilor Zach, go ahead.
Turner Richard. Yeah, I attended the library meeting a couple weeks ago, and they also presented to PEVIS. They're looking at opening to 7 days a week, possibly once the new restrictions are lifted. But right now they're open they extended their hours on Sunday from 10 to 3. Emma gave a very good report at the PEVIS meeting where she brought up a few things. They've received their Chromebooks, so from Scotiabank, and they thanked Mayor and Council for that. They also want to let us know they have started a newsletter, so you can keep up to date on what's going on with the library through your email. They reiterated that they've welcomed back Work BC for people that need help finding work or maybe changing their careers. And they're also a safe place for the RCMP designated safe place. Further to that, within the PEVIS meeting, we had the Pemberton District Museum Archive Society show up. They gave a presentation on what they've been up to, and a couple of the highlights for me was I believe they finished renovating one of their spaces and should have it up for rental for any of the community groups that want to use it. We asked what could we do with that room, and they said basically whatever we want. It's just going to be another source of revenue for them. Excuse me, sorry. One of the things that was really nice to hear is they have some of their First Nations artifacts they have in their library or have been returned to the appropriate First Nations. So they're definitely doing their part to reconciliation, which is fantastic to hear. Anna Scott Morris, the executive director for PAWS, gave a presentation and her justification behind hiring a part-time director to basically field phone calls, help with the building itself, do background checks for adoptions, and basically just do daily checkups on the animals that are left at the yard for now. And then we had a presentation from Miss Lisa Richardson, who's a project manager for Wellness Almanac, and essentially an update on what she's been doing within her project. There's a lot of good work that she's doing there for reconciliation. She presented some of the stats behind what her website's seeing, and a lot of them are based around assisting tools for First Nations people, and if they have a mental health condition, or hotlines to call if they just need somebody to speak with. So the work that she's doing is very, very important, and I will say her passion really comes out when she starts speaking about it. She had a very passionate presentation. It was really nice to hear from her again. That was the delegations. I think that was about it. We sent the direction request for PAWS to the board. for approval. So I guess we'll see what comes of that. And the draft budget was, I believe it was approved as well, if I remember correctly, for the for Beavis. Now, Richmond, is there anything that you want to touch on? You're on mute.
No, thanks, Ryan. I think it was just really good to hear from the community groups and volunteers talking about all their plans over the last couple of meetings and what they've accomplished over the last few years. And like the Councillor Zant says, the passion was evident in all of them in terms of the work they do for our community. So it's always a good chance for us to see that and be part of that. Yeah, I think you covered it all. Councillor Craddock, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Richmond. Just one question. Did you recall what the ask was from PAWS? Was it the $3,500 or was it a higher amount? I don't recall now.
Go ahead, CEO Gilmore.
Yes, their original ask, even when we considered what we talked about a while ago, was 15,000. So are you talking about their PVIS, their PDIF contribution?
Correct.
Yeah, and that was supported for 1 year.
For 15,000.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Right, you all done there, Councillor Zant? Okay. Any other council reports? Okay, so none. We will move to correspondence. We have 3 correspondence for action. The first is from Ms. Nikki Van Kirk, requesting that council defer OCP amendments until the OCP review has been completed. Go ahead, Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I just want to thank Ms. Van Kirk for writing in. I know she's representing a lot of people. I've heard this message from quite a few folks in the Benchlands and in other neighborhoods in the village. And I'd just like to encourage everyone to really take this message to heart when you're considering decisions in the future, and really consider the effort. When somebody takes the effort to write in, I really do think they expect discussion on the issues that they raise.
Thank you. Is there recommended action for this correspondence? Council?
I mean,
Councillor Craddock?
Are you looking for some discussion on this at the present time?
No, it's for action. So the recommendation is that council provide direction, that we have staff respond, that, including certain comments if we want, but we have to, it's for action. So we could file and receive, we could have staff respond and say that those comments will be definitely incorporated and already have been into the conversation. So those are options.
Yeah, if I might then, Mayor Richmond, a couple of things that I've heard from local people on this is they want to see this project move ahead so that there's a bigger opportunity for rental and different options for housing. The concern, if we put this off till the OCP review has been done, that's set up for over the next 2 years. It'd be pretty hard to put off all projects with OCP amendments for 2 years. That's to get the report back to council, and council deals with it. That could take anywhere up to 6 months potentially. So that would put any new housing or any new opportunities at least 2.5 years behind. So I would have a hard time agreeing to this total shutdown of the community OCP amendments until that review's in place. And certainly for the new developments, people are looking forward to the potential to be in town and not have to have driving and extra vehicles to get back and forth, even though it's only 5 minutes out to the new developments underway right now. So I would have a hard time agreeing to this delay when there's really nothing in the letter that suggests what the reasons are behind it. Thank you.
Councillor Noble?
Well, I agree with the general sentiment and concerns reflected in the letter, but I am also concerned about the 2-year timeline for the OCP review. So
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah,
tough one.
Yeah, it is. I feel the same way, and that's why I asked the questions today of staff. How, with the processes going on concurrently, how can we ensure that some of the high-level principles that we want to incorporate into the OCP review get reflected in this development's plans? Yeah, so I think I think Ms. Van Kirk brings up a very good point. I think our OCP review will definitely, I'm excited by it, and the vision that it'll bring with it, and the high level policy that it'll bring with it. And I feel that it's really important that we spend a lot of time being very thoughtful about how we move ahead with the bench lands, like any other development. But this is a big one. And so as we move through the steps, I'm hoping that a lot of those principles get addressed as we move along, and I'll be watching for that. But in the meantime, would we like to have a motion to respond to Ms. Van Kirk, saying thank you for your comments. They're much appreciated and will be considered as we move forward. Something below to that effect.
I'll move that motion.
Seconder. Councilor Zant, any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Next correspondence for action is from the Director of the Heritage Branch Ministry of Forests. And this is an invitation to participate in the engagement on updates to British Columbia geographical naming principles, policy and procedures process. The recommendation is that council advise if they'd like to attend and on which date. I think this could actually be really interesting. Do we have any thoughts about sending staff on any of that? I know everybody's got a full work plate, but was there any consideration that it would be beneficial to staff at this point in time, Ms. Gilmore?
I'll definitely circulate it to the management team and see if they can discuss it with their team members as well.
Okay, because I think it could be something good to participate in. Is there any interest from council? Go ahead, Councilor Noble.
I think we should send the mayor so he can update us all in his mayor's report.
Or we can send Councilor Noble so that I don't have to. Okay, well, not seeing any at this point. If anybody feels they have the time to attend, they can notify staff. I think that window will close shortly. So we'll motion to have the CEO distribute this to staff or to managers. Moved by Councilor Zant, second by Councilor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. And the third one is the LMLGA annual conference. The recommendation is that council advise if anybody's interested in attending. It is in Worcester this year. They are, I think, planning on going live and in person, right? Sheena, you know, it's meant to be live.
I haven't actually had confirmation. We're not, this was the only piece of information other than the resolution call for submissions that we've received. So we haven't got details on the conference, but what we wanted to do was flag it for council for those dates. And because once it's open, then we'll need to, in February, we'll need to book, book you in to the conference.
Okay, I'll have noted my interest in attending, and as things open up, we could follow up. Is there anybody else that would like to attend? Okay. And I know in the package we talked about the LMLGA resolutions being discussed at our next meeting. I just wanted to maybe give a heads up so that you'd have to prepare. One of the things that I'm interested in following up as a resolution, and I know there have been some made previously, so we'll have to check, but I would like to continue encouraging a conversation around policing costs and how when small towns go from below to above 5,000 population, the way the costs for RCMP services drastically increases. And I think it should be more of a transitional approach. So I know there's been resolutions on this before, and it's something I would like to discuss at the next meeting. I just wanted to give you the heads up, Sheena, in case you want to look at some previous resolutions to see how.
Thank you. We'll search that out.
Okay. Okay, correspondence for information, we have 4. Would anybody like to call any out? Seeing none, motion to receive.
Move
All
to
four,
receive.
Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. Late business, we have none. Notice of motion. Question period. So the regular council meeting is now open for questions from the public. Please be reminded that only questions directly related to items discussed during this meeting are permitted. If any members of the public attending via Zoom webinar wish to ask a question, please click on the raise hand feature in the webinar controls. This will notify staff that you would like to ask a question, and they will unmute your microphone when it is your turn to speak.
Mayor Richmond, we have a question from Nikki Van Kirk.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Van Kirk.
Thank you. Nikki Van Kirk, 1347 Elmwood. I just wanted to comment on my letter. Thank you for your discussion on that. I wanted to clarify that I wasn't looking for a blanket full stop, no amendments at all, but really focusing on these large developments that are going to impact the community in a really big way. And I heard Councillor Noble talk about at the committee of the whole today, that second proposal that was discussed, that it was going to be a huge impact on traffic in our one way in, one way out town. And I believe the Benchlands is very similar. It's a huge impact on traffic. Everybody has to come through town. So that's something to really consider and think about in our OCP as well. Do we need extra exits from town? And then also Councillor Craddock mentioned just now that people really want to be in town so they don't have to drive, even if it's only 5 minutes. And I would challenge you to think about people walking from that Benchlands coming down the hill of the new development and the existing hill. There's not very many people that are going to be walking for the groceries from there. So I just think it's important to make sure you keep in mind that the current OCP is quite old, and a lot of the people that gave input, a lot of people that gave input are no longer here, and there's lots of new people. Things have changed, and it's important to keep that in mind. So I hope that you will.
Thank you, Ms. Van Kirk, for your thoughtful comments. Are there any questions from any other of the public? Ms. Kennedy?
No, Mayor Richmond, there are no further questions.
Great. Hearing none, I will ask for a motion to recess the regular to go back in camera. Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll take 2 minutes and be back to go and finish up in camera. Reopen the regular and look for a motion to adjourn the regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.